Right, I am live. Chuck Holton here. Thank you for watching today on CBN News. I am coming to you from my home in Panama, where I've been gone for about 3 months solid, and so it's really nice to finally get a chance to be home for a little bit. It's an interesting time in Panama because we just got a new president here. President Jose Raul Mulino was just inaugurated last week, and the way he came to power is something that kind of makes me proud. At least I like to take a little bit of credit for the fact that he got elected, because for years I've been covering the immigration crisis both in the United States and here in Panama on the way to the United States. As you probably know, there have been hundreds of thousands of people crossing through the Darien Gap from Colombia to Panama on their way to the U.S., and those numbers have skyrocketed during the Biden administration. When I started reporting on this back in 2012, 35,000 people in a year was a crisis. And now they had gotten to the point where they had up to 5,000 people a day coming through. And last year they had 532,000 people cross in the calendar year, 2023. Absolute record. And it looked like this year was on track to beat that record. Now, most Panamanians didn't realize the scope of the problem. They knew there were migrants coming through there, but they didn't know how many. They didn't know what it was costing Panama. And that's because Panama did a really good job of moving them on very quickly. They didn't let them hang around in Panama. They couldn't go to Panama City and hang out. They couldn't, make their own way through the country. What Panama did is they arranged for buses to pick them up in the Darien Gap as soon as they got out to the road and bus them literally directly without stopping all the way to the Costa Rican border. When they got to the Costa Rican border, they dropped them off and they said, it's illegal for you to cross the Costa Rican border. It's closed to illegal migrants, but you can't stay here. And so they would cross into Costa Rica. Costa Rica would pick them up on a bus them to the Nicaraguan border, drop them off, do the same thing. Nicaragua would bus them to Honduras. Honduras would bus them to Guatemala. Guatemala would bus them to Mexico, and Mexico would send them right on to the United States. So once they made it through that 6-day walk through the jungle in the Darien Gap, they were pretty much home free. After that, it was pretty much just sitting on buses for the most part. Now, Panama made them pay for the bus ride, but it's only $40 basically to get them down the river from the first Indian settlement they reach in Panama, and it's still out in the jungle. It's about a 3-hour boat ride in a dugout canoe down the river to the IDP camp that they had set up, or not IDP camp, it's a refugee camp there. That camp was run by the Red Cross, UNHCR, HIAS, which is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. If you didn't realize that this Jewish aid society is actually assisting migrants to come illegally to the United States, it is. And that's one thing that has really tripped up a lot of my fellow journalists, is they've been just very up in arms about the fact that here you have Israel that is, at war, needs lots of help, asking for money and aid from the United States. At the same time, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society is spending millions of dollars to assist illegal migrants to make their way north to come into the United States illegally. There's maybe a little more nuance to it than that, but at the same time, you can kind of understand why they'd be upset that any agency is using its money, its funds, to assist migrants on their way. Because a lot of these migrants wouldn't come if it wasn't for the help that they receive from all these organizations, including the International Organization for Migration, which is a UN agency partially funded by the government of the United States in its donations to the UN, partially funded by private donations from George Soros and other agencies. And these migrants, many of them would not be able to come to the United States illegally if it wasn't for the help that they receive from these organizations. Now, I understand these people are human beings. They're coming out of the Darien Gap. They're half dead. Really, I mean, some of them are mostly dead. It's very bad, actually. After 6 days in the jungle with no clean water, very little food, bandits, bugs, predators of all kinds. And so, yeah, they're in bad shape and they need help. And I don't have a problem with giving immediate first aid to somebody who's literally going to die. I myself have literally picked up migrants that collapsed when they got to that refugee camp, to the Indian village out there in the jungle. They literally collapsed from heat stroke. And I picked up a 16-year-old girl and carried her to the medical tent and then helped revive her so that she wouldn't die. I mean, we don't want people to die, but we also don't want to encourage people to come that don't have any business coming through. Especially, there's so many people that bring children and drag them through the jungle like that. That should be a felony. That is absolute abuse, to bring a baby or a toddler or a child through the Darien Gap. When they get to Panama, they ought to be arrested. We've been saying this for a long time. That's all they'd have to do to stop it, is just say, if you come through here with a kid, you're going to jail. Well, the new president, Jose Raul Mulino, went further than that. Actually, since the Panamanian people didn't know much about it, as we were starting to get the word out, with a lot of help from my friend Michael Yan, Oscar Blue Ramirez, Ben Berquam of OAN News, and some guys from the Epoch Times that came down, some congressmen that we hosted in Panama and took them down to the Darien Gap to show them the scope of the problem. All of that started to get the word out. And as the message spread, Panamanians started to go, hey, wait a minute. This is costing our country a lot of money. We shouldn't be helping these people get through here. And, well, Jose Raul Mulino picked up on that as a campaign slogan and campaigned on the fact that he was going to shut down the Darien Gap. And that actually propelled him to the presidency in Panama. So I'm a little proud of that, because I feel like we had at least something to do with the fact that he is now president of Panama. The previous president, they called him the turtle because he just always had his, he was hiding all the time. He was not in good health, and he was too busy trying to impress the World Economic Forum to do anything actually good for his country. So he ended his term not very popular. And this new guy brings a lot of hope along with him. He's a little bit of a Trump-like figure, just a little bit. He's certainly not a left-wing like a Chavista, which we've seen a lot of Latin American countries electing. So that's interesting to see. Now, he claims he's going to shut down the Darien Gap. And that obviously would be a good thing for the United States because of the costs involved to the U.S. of having 500,000 people come through the Darien Gap to the U.S. illegally. Once they get into the United States, they cost the U.S. taxpayer money in terms of healthcare, in terms of law enforcement, in terms of education, and so on and so forth. And so it would be a good thing if we could help Panama or assist Panama in some way to help them stop that illegal migration. And so that is what Jose Raul Mulino is trying to accomplish. Now, what he's done is he summoned the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, to Panama. He was here on Inauguration Day, and even before he was inaugurated, Mulino was meeting with Mayorkas to determine how they were going to handle this shutdown of the Darien Gap, because it's not like you can just put a stop to. I'm showing you some video here of the inauguration ceremony. There's the new president right there, Jose Raul Mulino. This is the inauguration ceremony here in Panama City. And it's not like you can just close the gate, because there's no wall, there's no fence. There's not even really a border between Colombia and Panama. There are some established routes that the migrants, there's no road through the Darien Gap, obviously. That's why they call it the Darien Gap. It's about 60 plus miles of very extreme topography, very thick jungle, very dangerous, area. Lots of bandits and drug runners and things like that in there. And there's no fence. So these migrants have worn a path, several different paths, to get through there in the areas that are the easiest to get through. Even still, lots of them die on the trek because they get a couple of days into the trek and then find themselves confronted with a huge cliff of mud that they have to climb up about 1,000 feet. And some of them are just not in shape, good enough shape to do it. They're old, they're fat, they're sick, whatever, and they just can't make it up that cliff. But then they've come too far to go back, and so they're stuck in the jungle, and they just die at the bottom of that hill. They call it the Hill of Death. Now, Alejandro Mayorkas has been to Panama a couple times already, and every time he's come here, he has come not to stop the migration through the gap, but to make it easier, faster, cheaper, and safer. So he's come down here, given a couple speeches, and then arranged for accommodations from Panama that would allow people to take boats further around. Instead of walking for a couple days, they take a boat around and just start further along in the process. They pick up a boat sooner on the near side as they come into Panama, and that saves them from a bunch of walking. And so it has taken something that was a 6-day walk and taken it down to maybe a 3-day walk or even less, depending on how much money you have to pay for boats and even porters and things like that. So there's not a road per se, but there's a trail, a path that's been worn. And they can try to close those things, but it's like 10,000 square miles of jungle. They can just go around it. They can start from Turbo in Colombia instead of starting from Necoclí or something like that. They can. There's tons of ways they could go around it. And what this may do, if Mulino does actually close the current routes, is just create new routes and so on and so forth. But there's two parts to his plan. First of all, he wants to close the current routes, and he's doing that by just putting up barbed wire. I have some video of what it looks like out there. It's here. Turn the audio down so you can hear me. Now, this is out actually in the jungle. This is what the Darien Gap looks like out there. And I'm going to put this, let's put myself up here in the corner. These people are registering. They come in to the gap. They get to the first Indian village along the way, which is either a place called Bajo Chiquito or a place called Canan Membrillo. And this one is Bajo Chiquito. Because I've been to both of them, I can pretty much, I can recognize that. That's Bajo Chiquito. So they come in here, they register with the Panamanian authorities. The border police are called Centerfront. And that's Centerfront there. Then they're put on boats. They pay, I think it's $60-something now. And they're put on boats, taken down to a camp on the road. And then once they pay their $60, they're put on buses and sent to Costa Rica. They get that $60 by getting it from relatives, having it wired to them, friends, maybe even earning a little money through prostitution or selling whatever they have to sell along the way. Most of them come out of the jungle without anything because they get robbed on the way through. And so they get, by the time they get here, they're exhausted, they have no money, they have nothing, and they're kind of stuck. So once they're able to raise $60, they get on a bus and they head to Costa Rica. But now the Centerfront guys are heading out into the jungle and setting up barbed wire across the main routes to stop the people from coming through. But they're doing this on the Panamanian border. They're obviously not going to go into Colombia to do that. And so the people that have already started their trek along the way are a third of the way into the jungle when they come upon this barrier, the barbed wire, concertina wire across the trail, and they're stuck. Many of them don't have anything left. They've sold everything. They've gotten rid of everything. And so if they were to go back to Colombia, they'd be kind of stuck there, and they're not sure what to do. So they're likely just going to try to go around this, these blockades they put in place across the trail. So the second part of President Molino's plan is to take anybody who comes into Panama illegally and deport them back to their home country. Fly them right back. So if they're coming from Venezuela, we'll put you on a plane, fly you back to Venezuela. If they're coming from Cuba, we're going to try to fly you back there. China, whatever. Here's the problem with that plan. None of these things are going to be clean solutions. The problem with that part of the plan is that many of the countries where people are coming from don't accept returns. No returns, no refunds. So Cuba, China, I don't know about Venezuela. I think Venezuela does take them back, but Cuba and China don't. You got a Chinese guy come in here. What are you going to do with him if his country won't allow him to be taken back to China? You're not under international law. You're not legally allowed to send them back to Colombia, where they came from. Although that may change. I mean, that's international expectations. International law is basically international sort of protocol, but international expectations perhaps. So either Panama can put heavy pressure on China and Cuba and say, if you want anyone from your country to be allowed to come to our country with a visa, we're not going to allow that unless you take returns from our country. Folks, please go share this video. Take a second right now, hit the like button, and go share this video. Normally we have thousands of people watching. We don't have a ton of people on right now, although I haven't been on in a while, and so that's understandable. A lot of people are not looking for us, but if you share it on your other social media accounts, you can do that by just hitting the share button, which is right below the video to the right. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to share it on my Twitter page right now and see if we can get a few more people on the live. Also, if you hit the like button and that sort of thing, you can get YouTube to share it on YouTube to other people who have not yet found us. I did a companion video to this video earlier today on my own YouTube channel. It's called The Hot Zone with Chuck Holton. You can go find that fairly easily by just going to YouTube and searching for The Hot Zone. You can, The Hot Zone with Chuck Holton. I will put the link to that up on my, let's see here. There it is. It's at Hot Zone Podcast, but I can put the link to that up in the chat here. And if you get a second, click on that link real quick, open it in a separate window, and you can go and subscribe over there. Like I said, I did a companion video to this video talking about the SAFE Act that was just voted on in the U.S. Congress. And I will touch on that at the end of this video, but I wanted to get through this stuff about Panama because it does affect immigration in the United States pretty heavily. I mean, the United States has had a massive influx of migrants under the Biden administration. We have been running 200, 250, even upwards of 300,000 people a month over the last year. It's ramped up month by month throughout the Biden administration. But in the last few months, it's actually dropped by about half, down to 150, 175,000 a month. Now, that is still about 5 times what we saw at the end of the Trump administration. By the end of the Trump administration in 2020, we had seen it drop to about 35 to 40,000 a month on the U.S. southern border coming across illegally. And that was because of the Remain in Mexico policy. It was because of the heavy hand that Trump took, because of the wall he was building, and just the expectations that he was managing very well during his administration. And so it has absolutely exploded under the Biden administration. More than 5 million coming across that have been picked up by ICE or the Border Patrol, but also a tremendous number of known and unknown gotaways that could make it as high as 10 million people that have come into the United States. That brings us to the point where we're at in the U.S., where we have about 8 to 9% of our total population now in the United States are illegal migrants. And that has absolutely profound effects on everything in the United States. And I'll talk about that more in a second. Let's talk more about what's going on in Panama. So the new Molino administration got Mayorkas to come down here. Now, in his previous visits, Mayorkas has come with lots of pomp and circumstance. The media knew about it. It was in the U.S. press. But this trip was a lot more subdued. They didn't really want a lot of people to know that Mayorkas had come down here, because what he was doing was signing an agreement to pay for Panama to return people to their home countries. Panama said, look, we're going to grab them when they come into Panama. Rather than sending them on to the U.S. like we've been doing, we're going to put them on an airplane and send them back home. And you're going to pay for it. The U.S. taxpayer is going to pay for that. And Mayorkas said, yeah, okay. So he came down and put the U.S. taxpayer on the hook for about $6 million this year worth of plane tickets for people to go back. But this is a system that's easy to game, because all these migrants have to do is chuck their passport and say, I'm from Cuba. You know, I'm from whatever other country won't accept any returns. If you're from Africa and you don't want to get on a plane back to Africa, then you just say you're from Haiti and say, oh, too bad, Haiti won't take returns. Something like that. And believe me, these migrants will know exactly what to say when they get picked up by Centerfront, because they're all on these chat groups on Facebook and WhatsApp that are sharing this information with people that are behind them in the pipeline. So it becomes very, very easy for them to game the system. Now, so you have to give the president of Panama an E for effort. But I think in the long run, we have not yet seen how effective this plan to shut down the Darien Gap is going to be. One time before, Alejandro Mayorkas made a speech in Panama and declared that the Darien Gap was closed for the next 60 days, but they didn't actually do anything to close it. They just declared it to be closed. And everybody went, yeah, right, thanks. And they just kept on coming. They're a little more serious about it now, but like I say, it's easy for them to go around the barricades, and easy for them to throw away their passport, and easy for them to claim to be from a country that won't take returns. And if they don't do any of that, it would also be easy for them to absolutely destroy the airplane when they get put back on the plane in Panama. They tell them, okay, you're going back to Ghana. Get on the plane. You're getting flown back to your home country. And these guys are going to say, oh, heck no. I've been on the road for 10 months. I spent every dime I've got. I borrowed money from everybody I know to get here, to get this far. And as far as they're concerned, they've already been through a half dozen countries to get to Panama. There's no way I'm going back to my home country. And they just tear the airplane apart. So it's dangerous for it to take off. So that has happened in other countries. The UK tried to do this same thing, tried to export people that were making asylum claims back to Rwanda, where they had built them a whole housing development, and they were going to provide for their every need there. But you're going to wait in Rwanda while we adjudicate your asylum claim. And the first plane load that they tried to send back there, 2 guys tried to commit suicide. People were just trying to set things on fire, tearing the place up. They never even took off. Plane never took off. So as far as I know, Panama has yet to actually put anybody on an airplane going back to their home country. They're still getting their act together to try to do that. And this may not go as well as they hope. That's all I got to say about that. So now the problem is, I think I showed you, okay, I showed you that one. Again, this is the Panamanians, the center front, Panamanian Border Police, that are in the Darien Gap going out there to try to enforce the closure of the routes. But again, there's not enough border police to put out there, and there's a lot of jungle. And what this may end up doing is making people more beholden to the bandits that are out there who can show them how to get around the border checkpoints and go through the jungle. Now, I've said this before and I'll say it again. There is a way that the Panamanians could put a stop to this completely. And they've done it before and it worked during COVID. All they have to do is just say, if you come into our country illegally, with or without documents, we're not going to send you back to your home country, but we will put you in a camp out in the jungle in the Darien, which they already have. They've already built it. And you will stay in that camp for 1 year. After 1 year, then we will let you continue on your way, if you so desire. If at any point during that year you want to go home, you say, I don't want to live in the jungle anymore, then we'll put you on a plane and send you home. But you will stay in that camp for at least 1 year if you won't go home. And that would put a stop to it, because believe me, nobody, and I mean nobody, wants to spend a year in the Darien Gap. Nobody wants to live out there. No air conditioning, bugs the size of your face, mud that is biblical in its scale. Not a good place to live. But they've built a camp out there right across the river from Canan Membrillo that will hold 15,000 people. Now, when they did this during COVID, they said, look, if you're coming into our country through the Darien Gap and it's during COVID, you're going to stay in that camp out in the jungle until COVID's over. It ended up being about 10 and a half months before they opened it back up again. And everybody stopped coming. They just stopped because nobody wanted to do that. Panama should have been saying all along, if you come through there with a kid, you're going to jail for 5 years. Now you could say, well, they could just escape from the camp and make a break for it. Yeah, they could, except it's a very, very long, if you think it's a long walk through the Darien Gap, it's a much longer walk to the Costa Rican border. And there are some choke points that they would have to go through where it'd be very easy to pick them up. Because of the Panama Canal, there's only a couple of bridges across the canal. They could have checkpoints there. would cause real traffic snarls. They wouldn't even need to do that, though, because there's a checkpoint that they already have set up on a lake called Lago Baiano, which is a choke point coming out of the Darien Gap that doesn't get a lot of traffic, where they do stop every car. And it would be very, very difficult for them to walk around that, because they'd have to basically walk around a gigantic lake. It would take days and days more in the jungle. So that's all they have to do, is just tell them, if we catch you trying to get out of the Darien Gap, you're going to this camp for a year. If you try to escape from that camp, you're going to prison for 5 years. And it wouldn't even be that expensive. I submit it would save everybody money, including Panama, because people would stop coming. You would have to keep some people in that camp, because not everybody would stop, but almost everybody would stop. And so that would be the way to do it. But of course, then Panama would have to have the guts to face international opprobrium from the left-wing media, who would say, oh, you're keeping people in these terrible situations. And we're like, wait a minute. There's lots of Panamanians that live in the Darien Gap. Lots of Indians that live out there. So it is livable. They can survive. And we'll give them medical care. We'll feed them. You know, their every need is accounted for. We're just not going to make them comfortable. That's all. They don't have a right to be comfortable if they come illegally into Panama. So why not? One tired mama asks, Chuck, what happens with the children who emerge without their parents? There are a couple of dozen people every year, kids, who come out of the Darien Gap without family, without any parents, unaccompanied minors. For whatever reason, usually it's because their parents have died of exposure or drowned along the way. And they come toddling, and we're talking about infants, toddlers, come out of the Darien Gap with somebody else who says, this is my kid, but their parents drowned, and so I brought him out here. And they turn him over to the Panamanian authorities. Panamanian authorities don't know what to do with him. They don't have a good system for like foster care here in Panama or anything like that. So they usually put them up in a hospital or a hotel. And they go looking for their parents or for some family members or anybody to take them. In Panama, if a kid is orphaned, it's the responsibility of their immediate family or even extended family to care for those kids. So the Panamanian government will take the orphaned kid, go find an uncle, an aunt, a grandparent, whatever, and say, okay, you're a kid now. It's not like a voluntary thing. They say, nope, it's your responsibility. That's how it works. It'd be great if they did that in the United States. But so they don't really have a system for like adoption or anything like that here. And so if they can't figure out, the problem with some of these kids, they can't figure out even what country they're from, what their name is, because they're too young to tell you that stuff. And so eventually they just give them a name and put them in school and try to figure out some place for them to live. I mean, fortunately, that's a very small number of kids, but it's very difficult. And again, they don't have a established adoption system here in Panama. They don't really do that because, again, if there's an orphan kid in Panama, they find somebody that kid is related to, and they just foist him on that person and say, this kid's yours now. You need to take care of him. So that's what they do. Now, yeah, I know, there's lots of Americans who would love to adopt these kids, but Panama, they're not into that. They're like, why would we send them off to Americans when there's an uncle here or an aunt or somebody that we can give them to, and they can stay with their own immediate family? I like that idea, actually. I like it. There are, as far as I know, a couple of orphanages now that have been established that can handle these kids. But this is a fairly new thing that Panama is sort of trying to figure out. Now, why is this helpful for the United States if they're able to stop the migration through Panama? Because the people who come through Panama are the people that America should be most concerned about. We have people coming through from lots of terrorist countries: Iran, Syria, Somalia, Iraq, I've seen people from Indonesia, lots of Chinese coming through. They're the most concerning migrants. They're not the Mexicans looking for work picking apples. No, these are people that are coming from very far away, and they're coming from failed states, third world countries. The problem that we've seen with these people, I mean, they're human beings. They need a place to live. Yes, they're likely fleeing a very bad situation in Syria or whatever. I don't want to live in Somalia, but so I don't blame them for leaving, but they have to cross through a whole bunch of other countries to get to the United States. Any one of those other countries would be a fine home for these people. They could easily live in Brazil or Ecuador, Colombia. You know, any of those countries, you know, they could make a home. But they don't. They're coming to the United States. They're coming because of the pull factors that the U.S. represents. That is the programs we have in place to support them, the higher wages they can gain, and that makes them economic migrants. They're not asylum seekers. They do not have an asylum claim if they've already passed through a dozen countries and didn't make an asylum claim in any of those countries. So these are the people we should be most concerned about. They're picking up last year 2 or 3 people every month who are on a terror watch list coming through the Darien Gap in Panama. And a lot more of those people that are coming through could easily have ties to Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the IRGC, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and just not be on a database yet because they haven't been picked up before. They could certainly have proclivities toward terrorism, and there's no way that we would know until they start shooting people or blowing things up in the United States. So it's a big problem. Now, the United States Congress has been, Stanley Barton says is Mayorkas holding up his agreement with the new president of Panama. His agreement essentially is just opening your wallet and giving Panama $6 million. So from what I understand, yes, they are so far making good on that. That money will be used to buy plane tickets or charter aircraft to send people back to their home countries. But again, not everybody can be sent home. So the United States Congress has been trying to take some steps to keep the vast number of people in the United States illegally from actually voting in our upcoming election. This is a big problem. And now I'm going to get into some of the things I covered on my own channel earlier today when I was talking about this issue specifically. So they voted on this, what's called the SAFE Act. The SAFE Act is meant to require people that register to vote in our federal elections to show proof of their citizenship in order to be able to vote. And Democrats are setting their hair on fire over this. You would think it would make a lot of sense. I mean, most people in America say, yeah, I don't want people voting who aren't actually citizens. I don't want illegals coming here and helping to elect who they want. And you know what's funny about that is that it's because most Americans, it's very clear that if non-citizens are in our country and are voting on our president, they're going to be voting for the guy who's going to give them the most money. Money that they didn't earn. They didn't contribute to. They just showed up here from Indonesia or someplace and are going to be voting for the guy who's going to be promising them the most benefits. Funnily enough, that's pretty much how U.S. elections go. There are a good, very large percentage, actually, of Americans who pay no tax whatsoever. Maybe about 40% at the last I checked, which was years ago. 40-something% of Americans actually pay no federal tax. They actually get money back from the federal government because they don't make enough money. And so they're not actually contributing to the Treasury. But they are taking from the Treasury when they get these tax rebates, credits, things like that. It's just a massive redistribution of wealth, taking money from people who happen to be making good money, giving it to people who happen not to be making good money. The problem with doing that is that is actually the domain of the church. This is the federal government trespassing on the domain of the church and other, non-governmental agencies that are meant to be the ones who take care of the sick and the poor and the aged. But when the government does it, then there's strings attached. The government can essentially buy your votes by saying we're going to give money. We're going to give away this much money. We're going to make the rich people pay their fair share. It's this sort of class warfare that they rely on to try to get your votes. We'll increase Social Security. We'll increase Medicare. We'll increase, the SNAP benefits. We'll increase whatever. Already the largest expenditure in the U.S. federal budget, by a long shot, are all of these quote unquote entitlements. Massive, massive expenditures that we're making. And every dollar, you understand, like Social Security, the whole idea behind Social Security was you put money aside, you take your money, you put it away. It's a forced savings plan. We're going to force you to save money for retirement so that you won't become a ward of the state. So we're going to take this money from you. We're going to put it aside from you. It's going to earn some interest, and we're going to give it back to you when you retire. You could do much, much better with your investments if you put it away yourself for retirement. But the government couldn't control the money that way. If they let you keep your own money rather than taking it from you in Social Security and leave it up to you to save it or invest it the way you see fit, the government could not have the control. It couldn't buy your votes by giving you back your own money in Social Security. Problem is now the government has taken the entire Social Security trust fund and spent it and filled the trust fund with IOUs. And so now it's a big Ponzi scheme. They're not giving you back your own money when you collect Social Security. They're taking money from people who are working today and passing it on to you because they've spent your money. And that's only getting worse as years go by. And the Social Security is going to collapse. It can't continue for much longer because of the demographics. We're just not having enough babies. I've tried talking about that recently, and actually YouTube took the video down because I was talking about what is known as the Great Replacement Theory. And YouTube was like, you can't talk about that. And they took the video down. But suffice it to say, the federal government wants to take over the things that should be the domain of charity so that they can control those things and buy your votes with them. And so that's happening already, but we don't want, Americans might not understand all that, but they do understand that that will be the case if we let illegals vote in our elections. They'll be voting themselves money from the Treasury that they didn't contribute to. So that's a very popular thing in America. Don't let these people vote in our elections. What I showed on the last live is that according to a study that was conducted in 2008 after the 2008 election, they interviewed a large group of people who were in the United States illegally and found out that most likely, according to their own admission, between 38,000 up to 2.8 million of these people claim to have voted in the 2008 election. If you look at this page of that report, down here toward the bottom, 81.8% reported voting for Barack Obama compared to 17.5% for John McCain. 81.8% of the people who are non-citizens who voted illegally in our presidential election in 2008 could have made a big difference in that election. That only gets more extreme in the 2020 election, where, as I showed on the last video, theoretically, a mere like 75,000 people out of 30 plus million that could be in the United States illegally. Well, back then, let's say 20 million, because this is before the Biden administration let another 10 million in. So of the 20 plus million illegals who were in the United States during the 2020 election, only about 75,000 of them, in the best case scenario, would have had to have voted illegally in our election in order to sway the election for Joe Biden. It would actually be closer to 100,000 because not all of them theoretically would have voted for the Democrats. And so you'd have to have gotten at least 75, 80,000 who did. And so you'd need 100,000 plus to vote illegally in the election to do that. Well, if we've got now 30 million illegals in the United States, it's a very, very small percentage of them would actually have to successfully vote in the federal election in order to sway the election one way or the other. And so this is why the U.S. Congress voted on this SAFE Act in order to require people to show proof of citizenship to vote. It doesn't seem like a bad idea for most people. But listen to what the Democrats had to say about that.
Republicans want to throw up barriers because when people vote, they lose. Let me be clear. They don't want you to vote. They don't want to hear black voices, brown voices, LGBTQIA voices, young voices. Our fundamental access to our democracy is being politicized. And this xenophobic attack that we're debating today will make it harder for Americans to vote. My Republican colleagues will claim that requiring IDs is a small ask, but nearly 30 million people lack a valid driver's license, and about 15 to 18 million adults don't have access to documents proving their birth or citizenship. Americans don't need more obstacles. It's already...
This Representative Summer Lee from Pennsylvania, Democrat, claiming that this SAFE Act, which simply would require people to show an ID, which you have to do to go to the hospital, you have to do to practically get into a movie theater these days, would be racist and would unfairly target gay people. I can't understand that's a stretch, to say the least. But One Tired Mama says, do you think the SAFE Act is just a front since illegals are able to get ID cards and such? It seems like the dog is chasing its tail with this whole thing. Some states, I would say, have made this something of a self-licking ice cream cone, if you will. I did some research earlier this morning on this and found there are, something like almost 24 states that allow illegals to get driver's licenses so that they can drive legally in the United States, even though they're here illegally. And of those, 14 states automatically, in some way, shape, or form, register these people to vote when you get a driver's license. Now, in most cases, there's some sort of system in place when they do that to try to weed out people that shouldn't be registered to vote. But in many cases, that is just simply an affidavit that the person has to sign, or where they swear that I am not an illegal, or I'm sorry, I'm not here legally. But that's kind of on the honor system. So they get a driver's license, they're automatically registered to vote because of that, and it's the honor system whether or not they actually go exercise that right to vote. Now, in recent days, there have been several journalist outlets like the Epoch Times and Muckraker Brothers who have found specific instances of NGOs in Mexico encouraging illegals to vote in the presidential elections when they get to the United States. Even going so far as to hand out flyers to explain to them how to get registered to vote so that they can vote illegally in the U.S. elections. So it's not this is not something we're pulling out of thin air. This is a real concern for the United States. And the congressmen in the Republican side, or at least, are trying to do something about it. But when they held their vote, it went almost completely along party lines. It ended up passing 221 to 198 in the House, and only 5 Democrats voted for that bill. Now, how this manages to be, if all the Democrats can come up with is that this is somehow unfair to black people, that's a real stretch, and it's a real racist argument to say you're essentially saying black people aren't smart enough to get themselves an ID card, or they're too poor to get themselves an ID card. They can't earn enough money to pay the $35 or whatever it is to get yourself a driver's license. Beside the fact that many states will, if you can't afford a driver's license, they will give you an ID card for free if you fill out the form. And so what are they saying? Colored people are not smart enough to fill out a form? I don't get how it oppresses homosexuals, because they're typically higher educated and earn more money than the average American. Some states have made it so that you do have to show ID to vote, but in state elections, but the federal elections, they're not allowed to require that. And that's what they were trying to fix with this SAFE Act that they just came through. One thing that the SAFE Act did was it gave the states easier access to a database that the federal government under the Department of Homeland Security keeps. It's called the SAFE database, actually. So it's not the SAFE Act, it's just a separate thing, but it happens to have the same acronym. And this database keeps track of the names of people who are in our country illegally, ironically enough, so that we can have them on a list to give them benefits. So that they can get benefits. They have to be signed up on this list. And, SNAP benefits and things like that. So it'd be fairly easy to cross-check the voter rolls in any jurisdiction with the SAFE database and see if there are any matches. And if there are, then we know, these people should not be voting. And we're going to cancel their votes. The Democrats are saying, well, this is unfair to the 11% of people in our country who don't have an ID card who are citizens. But the SAFE Act actually made a carve out for most of those people, whereby they could either sign an affidavit saying they were a citizen under penalty of perjury, have a person who could prove citizenship vouch for them, or put them in a category where they could vote, but that vote would be held aside and counted separately, and then could be checked if it was that close. If the election was that close, then those votes could be double checked to make sure that those people were actually citizens. And the Democrats just didn't like that. I think there's not much clearer to show that Democrats literally want illegals to vote. So they're claiming, like this lady that's
Republicans want
here,
to throw up barriers because when people vote,
she's whining about Republicans don't want people to vote because they lose when people vote. Well, they lose when illegal people vote because they're not promising to give illegal people lots of benefits. That's what the Republicans are saying, okay? Now, I wanted to cover one other thing as we come down to the end here, and that is a claim made by Reuters. Reuters recently came out with an article that said that deportations under Joe Biden are up from the Trump administration, meaning Biden is deporting more people than Donald Trump did. This is a flat out misinformation. Reuters is supposed to be the, gold standard for non-biased news. And this is just flat out misinformation being spread by Reuters. And my friend Todd Bensman over at the Center for Immigration Studies wrote an article, which I put over on my webpage. You can go to chuckholton.com and find this article that's written by Todd Bensman to explain why it's wrong, but I'll explain it now. What Reuters is doing is they are combining two numbers and calling the sum of those numbers deportations, when they're really not. When we talk about deportations, what we're really talking about are removals. So there are two different ways that people are sent out of this country when they are here illegally. One is called returns and one is called removals. Returns is where people cross the border illegally. They're picked up by the Border Patrol. The Border Patrol immediately takes them back to the border and opens the gate and sends them back across the fence into Mexico. This happens when they are illegally here, when they're Mexican citizens, we can do that. Or when we have some other reason to say, this guy is a convicted felon, he's been deported before, whatever it is, they have a reason where they can literally send him right back across the border, and they don't have to go through the process of adjudicating a claim for asylum, maybe because they've already had that claim adjudicated and been denied, or what have you. But anyway, a return is where we can legally send them right back to Mexico without going through the whole process of letting them into the country, giving them a court date, waiting 3 years for their asylum hearing, and then having them, yes or no, be either granted or denied asylum. That's called a return. And the number of returns has skyrocketed for one reason and one reason only. Because the total number of people crossing the border illegally from the South has jumped by a factor of 10. The number of people coming across the U.S. southern border illegally from the Trump administration to the Biden administration literally went up 1,000%. 10 times. And so it's chaos on the southern border. And so it stands to reason that there would be that many more people that the Border Patrol would catch, that they would say, wait a minute, you've already been here. You've already been denied. You can't come in and try again. Bye, and they just push them back into Mexico. Those are not considered to be deportations. Those are called returns. It's different. Deportations are something else entirely. They're not called returns, they're called removals. And a removal is where ICE picks somebody up, arrests somebody. An ICE agent, some guy gets stopped for DUI or commits a felony and gets arrested or what have you, ICE catches a guy, can prove that he's here illegally, he does not have an asylum claim, he's already either had that adjudicated and been denied, or he's overstayed his visa or whatever. And then they march that guy to the airport, put him on an airplane, send him back to his home country. That's a deportation. And deportations under Joe Biden should be way up, just like the returns are. The number of people being deported should be off the charts. But it's not, but they're not. Whoop, my light just died. But they're not. They're not off the charts. So let's show you this graph here. The first three bars are the last 3 years, are the first 3 years, the last 3 years of the Trump administration, when the number of people coming across the border every month was in the, was under 50,000. We were deporting, actually kicking out, about 250,000 people a year. That's under Trump. The first year of the Biden administration, that went down to about 60,000. 2022 fiscal year, 72,000. 2023 went up to 143,000. None of those are even close to what we saw under the Trump administration. This is courtesy of my buddy Todd Bensman, and the guy that wrote the article is John Fear at the Center for Immigration Studies. So the claim that Reuters is making that total deportations are higher under Biden than they were under Trump, is misleading and outright false. It's just wrong. And again, you can read that article if you go over to chuckholton.com. I've posted it over there, so you can use that to share with your friends. While we're on the topic of sharing, would you please share this video with your friends on social media? Share this video and like it on YouTube here. All you have to do is go hit the like button down there. Would be very helpful. It does help YouTube know that they need to show this video to more people. And it helps CBN stay on the air. So if you'd like to donate to CBN to keep us reporting, this is expensive actually, I would suggest that you go to CBN.com and donate over there. You can donate through YouTube, but YouTube takes a big cut of that. If you go to CBN.com, you'll get a lot more bang for your buck. And CBN does a lot more than just news. They also help a lot of people. I can testify from having worked with them for more than 20 years. They make very, very wise use of the money that people donate to help as many people as possible. So highly recommend you go to CBN.com and donate. That is all I have for today, folks. And so I'm going to let you go, but we always want to pray before we end. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Lord God, we just come to you right now and we ask for your favor over America. We ask that you would put your hand of blessing on America. We don't deserve it, Lord. So many of us have not only just gone astray and done things that have, we've accepted things and allowed things to happen in our country that obviously grieve your heart. But I pray, Lord, that you would just thwart the plans of those who are looking to tear down our country. That you would make America a shining city on a hill. And that we would be able to stop people who are illegally and immorally trying to affect our elections. Anybody who is trying to encourage illegals to vote. Anybody who is trying to affect our elections through social media or any kind of information campaign. Lord, I pray that you would thwart their plans. And I pray that Americans would make wise choices, would have clear-eyed view of what's really important and what we should vote for in our country. And we just ask for your wisdom. That's all. Not that one candidate or another would win. We know, Lord, that your will be accomplished with or without a president who follows you, but we pray for a godly president, Lord. We pray for a president who would uphold life in every way. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, folks, thank you very much for watching. And again, please share and like this video. I'll be on talking about Israel again very soon, so stay tuned.